The following video is a condensed clip from Thought Lab, one of the 4 Philosophy Portal live event spaces. To watch the whole video, or to attend and participate in future events, visit philosophyportal.online and become a member today. All right, welcome to the very first Thought Lab. Thought Lab is really a space where the portal is trying to create a space to highlight who I think are the thought leaders of our moment and create a space where we can sort of discuss our shared becoming with people, basically, who've been engaging a long-term conceptual mediation of important concepts for our moment. And I think our guest today, Alenka Zupančič, is a perfect example of someone who I think represents such a thought leader and someone who's been thinking about specifically the concept of sexuality now for a very long time. Obviously, someone who's influenced my intellectual development and my career quite a lot. So welcome, Alenka. It's really great to have you here and discuss a little bit and open it up to Q&A with the members.
Thank you very much, Cadell, for inviting me to this lab. We'll see how thought is produced here and if there is any produced, but I'm eager, to engage with this and to give it a try. Actually, what I wanted to do, this was my idea a little bit during my presentation. The discussion, of course, is quite open also to other things. But since from what I understood, you did share this paper with other attendants, and I know you are teaching my book for quite some time now. So perhaps in order to avoid just repeating myself and, presenting some stuff that you were already able to read, I thought that perhaps I would just present another angle or another entry into these topics, which is a little bit perhaps more from a kind of concrete way of questioning. Let's say, that I very often work with this question of ontology and sex and ontology, and we'll come to this, but precisely there are ways of kind of, even if one starts with kind of concrete things and questions to come to this. So let's say that, and I thought that perhaps a good way to enter this would be, I was recently reading a book by Laurine Berlon, who just recently also died. Her last book, which has this really ingenious title, On the Inconvenience of Other People. And I was thinking about it, and I thought I could use some of the ideas that also this book gave me to re-enter, let's say, these topics of sex and sexuality, which, as you surely know, for me is not something that we have or that we do, but is more like an articulation, a structuring of something that precisely is not a full-blown substance, but still it is something. So I thought that perhaps I would start with this interesting interrogation, like in the 20 minutes, and then, as I said, we can then go to the text, to other stuff related, just to kind of introduce perhaps a new additional angle to this. So it was one of the questions that I think are kind of very simple, but nevertheless kind of interesting, that Berlin also asks in this book is, should sex in the sense of sexual encounter, like having sex, should sex be an event? And I think, as you can see, this is a kind of questioning, I think, that refers to, if we phrase it in another way, that it refers to this kind of a pressure that is often put on sex to function as a kind of ultimate real of a relation, let's say, or sexual relation, and so on. That there is something, or that it is something intrinsically meaningful, that kind of the sex itself, the act, or that it kind of constitutes the real of everything that is spread around it. So. And I think it is very interesting how she kind of precisely goes against this idea that sex is an event in this sense. And one idea is, I'm really paraphrasing also with my own words and ideas, but I would put it like this, that in a way, it is, I think everybody experienced that sexuality functions always as a kind of extension of its world, whatever its internal world, to other time, to other space, to other environments, let's say beyond the encounter. This was also one of the major theses in What is Sex? But at the same time, even if you use this image of extension, something like growing, happening simply, not some major thing, but then just there are all these extensions. But the question is precisely, can it be held to constitute a kind of hard kernel or anchor point of this web that spreads around it? And I think this question is much more interesting than its kind of washed down version, which would be something like, can we just have sex for the sake of sex, or does it need to be something more? Which is again another. And I think this is not at all the question that I'm asking here. I would put it like this: while sex is always more than sex, precisely in the sense that sex does not constitute any kind of autonomous core substance that we could then isolate and neatly circumscribe as such, and then compare it and measure its significance. It is always more than just, let's say, like physical description of an act, but the more at stake is not simply that of significance, but precisely that of extensions, of the way in which this touches all kinds of things. And then the question is precisely that of the, let's say, destiny of these extensions. Do they remain loose ends? Do they start forming something else? What is this something else? And significance possibly only start to get form or not here, not in any kind of like immediate way. And so I think this is also something that comes across from what Berlin, how she works with sex and comedy, also with these two topics that I kind of can easily relate to. And so her proposal, for example, which is a kind of interesting, is to move away from the rhetorics of an event and propose rather episode as a kind of term to think about, let's say, this precocious status of sex. And I will just read you one passage which I think is kind of interesting, and also on this purely phenomenal level, quite empirical level, kind of rings true. She says, I read, sex is not usually an event in any philosophical, juridical, psychoanalytic, or aesthetic sense. It is an episode. But to call something an episode is not to denote a mere episode, life reduced to things that happen. It denotes a situation that takes time, that rises and falls in intensity and consequence, that may be forgettable until it emerges later in a series. It might become an episode, it might become an event that reshapes a life or a world, but it prefigures nothing. It is a scene of temporal demand on your attention, like the punctum, the vignette, and the joke. Like a joke, it opens you up, at least to asking and shaping what happened and what is happening. So I think it is a kind of a also interesting way precisely to kind of connect a certain comedic. Here she uses the term joke also and the kind of this sexual thing that happens, precisely in the sense of what it opens up or not as a space. So in this sense, she's moving away from also this kind of emphasis on the eventfulness of a sexual act, in the sense of it being necessarily something extraordinary, and also kind of then aligns the distinction between event and the ordinary with the distinction between, let's say, melodrama and comedy. So melodrama would be the extraordinary and comedy the ordinary. So in the sense that comedy also is always about little things, little details. But I think what is really important here is to avoid precisely this kind of simple reversal, which would push comedy or sexuality into sentimentality, in the sense it is really these little ordinary everyday casual things that matter most, as opposed to exceptional and the extraordinary. There is sometimes only a very thin line that separates Berlin from this kind of what I call sentimentalism of the ordinary, but the line is nevertheless quite sharp, and I think it is decisive. And I would formulate it, I think perhaps the best way to formulate what Berlin opposes to this kind of swollen grandeur of the event is not simply the ordinary, but what I would propose to call the odd ordinary. And this odd also kind of refers to the way I use this term in my book on comedy, the odd one in. And I think precisely also this could one read, if one reads the book, this odd ordinary, this is not simply about, let's say, little things that matter most, but about precisely slightly odd, disturbing little things that can come to matter most, and where we are aware of the otherness of the other as well. So it is about how things do not immediately click, and which does carry these things, these odd things, the trace of what happened as disturbance of the ordinary, precisely, but still not some kind of ecstatic extraordinariness. And then again, get weaved or not into the ordinary, conceived as, let's say, structure and temporality, and it can also induce some transformation of this structure. So perhaps, and I would say that in this sense, this odd ordinary is precisely the inconvenient, what she calls in the title, the inconvenient, the otherness of other people as part of the ordinary, rather than this kind of ecstatic otherness, the other, who is completely, this kind of completely other. So one way, I guess, of reading this would be to say that, the true otherness that we encounter precisely dwells in this kind of details. I don't know, how she sips her coffee, the noises that he makes when whatever. So, and we could say we love or fall for some of these details and feel perhaps repulsed by some others. And really crucial in this context, I think, is to ask this question: what exactly would it mean in this context to even seek or bear the inconvenience of other, the inconvenience that emerges, the ambivalence also of this kind of wanted co-presence? So I think the very crucial thing is precisely to insist, this at least I would do, that the element of inconvenience is just as present in the first case that I mentioned about, that is to say, let's say, odd details that we fall for. Inconvenience is fully there, even if we don't experience it as bad, as a kind of bad inconvenience. And actually, I would go as far as to say that the mere fact that what can make us happy or in love or pregnant with desire lies in the other, with the other, is itself a major inconvenience. So the problem is not that the other people stand in the way of my personal fulfillment and satisfaction, but rather that there is somehow no personal fulfillment and satisfaction without this element of otherness, without this kind of proceeding in brokenness also. So And I think this constitutes perhaps the fundamental inconvenience, not simply the presence of others and that we need to tolerate them, but also that we, in a way, stand and fall with them or this inconvenience for our most intimate, let's say, not only depend on, but actually that there are things that are we are us that can only happen on this extimate stage. And I think in this sense, I would say that the inconvenience of other people is precisely our own extimacy, to use this Lacanian term where he combines something intimate and something external, so extimacy. And also, I guess the Lacanian term for the inconvenience of other people would perhaps simply be the split subject as necessarily split, involved in desire and so on. So in this sense, we could say that to bear inconvenience is not about tolerating the things about others that are not particularly appealing to us. On a more fundamental level, to bear inconvenience is, I would put it like this, to bear the desire. Or to use the Lacanian parlance again, to not give up on your desire, this ne pas céder sur son désir. And this is not about the desire for this or that object or simply for this or that person. I'm here referring to this kind of more fundamental level of this Lacanian motto or whatever idea. The structure, the split of desire. Desire is the point of our heteronomy. It is the entry point of the structure of the other. So, and of course, at the same time, this point is itself dialectical, implied in a movement, for it is not simply that I desire or need the other. I desire something in the other more than the other. I also desire the desire of the other, and so on. And so, in a way, this I would relate this to this title. The desire is desire precisely for or of the is desire for the inconvenience of other people. That there is this is not simply I desire them, but then there is this obstacle that prevents me to fully reach them. In a way, desire already has this loop. It's also the desire precisely for the inconvenience of other people, in the sense that I try to briefly sketch about. So in this sense, I think this is also an interesting way to precisely look at the question of sex and sexuality and this negativity that I keep insisting upon as precisely this gap introduced by the very fact that there is something that always, not only in love, when we talk about love or desire, also when we talk about the most stupid enjoyment, already involves the dimension of the other, something even also in this more stupid sense, you can say to enjoy always is to trespass in a way. In some other space, it's not bound to just, it is necessarily that there is this extension that necessarily brings in also a certain dimension of the other. So so this is this negativity and this, so which is at the same time a problem, but also the very side, the very negativity where the most exciting or terrible things can happen. But it's this opens this space, this gap is precisely the let's say the vivid point of also what we call sex, sexuality, and so on. So in a way, also I think Berland's, and I will briefly conclude now, Berland's project could also be seen as a kind of conceptual proposal or invitation to build with what keeps us apart in a way. So again, not in the sense of heroically or saintly enduring the differences that otherwise repel or even disgust us, but precisely by loosening these odd things just enough to make them into a possible structure, indeed a kind of infrastructure, she liked this term, that allows the emergence of a scene of desire also, and love, and so on, and sexuality in this sense that it also which are part of the sexuality as such. So I would simply, in conclusion to this first presentation, I would simply say that it is not that I could find also this question of the other. It is not that I could perhaps find an ideal other who would simply function as my extension. You know, this is the precisely the kind of control that perversion kind of attempt to assure, that actually you are the instrument of the other's jouissance, or you are the play toy of their jouissance, and so on, that kind of prearrange certain things where the other is in a way your extension and you are extension of the other, but as different from this precisely that there is this gap in negativity, which is at the same time not that you need to have sex with the other, but that you have it precisely at the place which separates you from the other, which cannot be appropriated by neither one nor the other, and precisely as such it remains the let's say the interesting, or not, not saying that it's always turns out like this, topological question, in which then also topological point, which then also connects sexuality like almost naturally to all these kind of antagonisms that are being part of it, and of which sexuality is the side, because I'm not by antagonisms, I don't mean just some kind of struggle between people or whatever, war of the roses, but precisely something that is antagonistic in itself, gets a certain kind of structure, formulation, solution in the sense of existence nevertheless. Okay, I hope this makes any sense, and I hope that you can relate it to the things that you read, but it's just a kind of opening through, opening point to some of the other things that we can then discuss now in what follows.
Fantastic, Alenka. You know, it's definitely throwing me in a totally different direction than is sex passé. But at the same time, you know, I just want to reiterate how beautifully challenging and how beautifully odd I find your thinking, and I was trying really to try to pull from some examples of what you're pointing for from my life right now. But the first thing I want to highlight, or what stands out to me, is you're trying to make a differentiation between our capacity to bear these odd differences from the image of a hero or a saint. And I just want to try to get at, like, what do you think's at stake in making that distinction? You know, not like this sort of saint-like capacity to bear the other, but you know, what mode of subjectivity are you pointing towards there, as opposed to just this enduring of differences?
No, I think this is a very good question, and my kind of first Lacanian impulse would be to say that I am all for the saints, if you want, and it is not exactly this what I mean by this kind of this general discourse that we need to tolerate the other indifferences. This has very little to do with saints in the sense that, let's say, Lacan discusses them either in vis-a-vis this feminine jouissance and so on, or in the sense in the ethics seminar, where there is precisely saints do not tolerate these things. They made them also their mode of enjoyment, if you want. It is not simply there is something much more palpable and much more I would say concrete. So I'm not saying, okay, I am also not kind of propagating some kind of saintly love, but I would simply, the demarcation line that I was trying to make is more along the lines of what, okay, one can also call this kind of miracle, that is sometimes the miracle of love, which kind of precisely manages to transform the thing that kind of disturbs you into the very glue of a possible glue or whatever substance of a possible relation or link and so on. And perhaps another way of putting this is also using the Lacan has this phrase that love as sublimation is about making desire condescend to the object, precisely not in the sense that you can desire the object without its being this kind of, with this kind of sublime shell around it, or sublime shell of impossibility. So yeah, I guess these are all the kind of ideas that I wanted to bring in when I make this distinction. But there is something about saint and saintly way of referring to the other and enjoying, which kind of precisely pushes all through this kind of inconvenience kind of directly, which is a specific mode. But my argument was not so much pointed against this as against this kind of much more this kind of watered down ethical discourse, which invites us to kind of tolerate this. Obviously, this cannot work. I cannot be with someone trying to tolerate. I mean, this inconvenience, this kind of thing, has to find another structure, another substance than simply that of the repulsion. Is this does this make sense? Or I'm not sure if.
Yeah, what's standing out for me is what you're sort of calling the miracle of love, in terms of transforming the thing that disturbs you into a possible glue, of a transforming what disturbs you potentially into a mode of enjoyment. I mean, the thing that's running through my mind right now, see if it hits, is that this is sort of a mode of relating to the other from the perspective of the drive, as opposed to either repressing the other or disavowing the other or foreclosing the other. That the drive would precisely engage in this type of activity. The drive would try to see what conditions of possibility there are in being disturbed, where enjoyment might be possible.
Yes, this is absolutely right. And I would simply add that perhaps what is slightly disorienting in what I was proposing today comes precisely from the fact that, okay, after this book and all this focus that I put on the drive in these past years, I'm now really trying to not at all to kind of go back or forward or whatever to desire, but to kind of reintroduce desire as precisely something that is not incompatible simply with the drive, because sometimes we made this kind of distinction. You have to kind of desire is bad because precisely of these dialectics related to the other, and the drive is more radical. I don't know. I think there is something to be rethought with all the problematic aspects of desire, but nevertheless, in the sense of a certain radicality of desire, which is also very interesting and which is precisely not opposed to the drive. And so sometimes not exactly drive, but I think that enjoyment, and this is particularly obvious, I think, in the forms of perverse enjoyment. Enjoyment can be a defense against desire. Usually you say that desire is a defense against enjoyment or against crossing a certain line there. But at the same time, I think the opposite is also true, that you kind of defend yourself against desire by precisely proving that you enjoy, that you whatever, there is the enjoyment can be some kind of a adequate object of desire, let's say, that actually, or that enjoyment is what deep down desire wants. And this, precisely this incompatibility between desire and enjoyment is what is very well articulated also through the drive. And I kind of try to precisely relate them or read them more closely together, this question of desire and drive, than I used to. But yeah, fundamentally, I would say yes to your question, that it is something that precisely this very notion of driver circulation around something that actually takes time, which is not, and kind of construct also certain, I mean, even if it's a circular movement, circumscribing something, circling around something, produces this thing in a much, in a more, in a way which is not direct, but precisely because it cannot be direct in this way.
I'm trying to think through here just something specific in regards to the thing which disturbs you in the other as potentially also the sign of a threat or the sign of something where you could be put into danger. And how do you have any way to think through the negativity of the disturbance in relationship to determining whether or not it's a potential glue that you can work with, or whether it's something that is just something which is triggering, the need for distance or the need for a furthering of the gap? Because, I'm thinking of something very specific right now. I don't need to go into
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, does that make sense what I'm pointing towards?
Yeah, no, of course it does. I think I would perhaps point out two things. One is to start with this more narrow part of the question or the answer. Not only that, yeah, some things can necessitate distance rather than gluing things. It's also that certain, that there are situations when certain things that are disturbing, let's say, about the other, start constituting a glue, let's say, for wrong reasons. I mean, this is what we usually call some kind of whatever toxic relations or whatever. That there are certain ways in which, let's say, this more or less destructive or more or less not really nice ways of how precisely this disturbance can also constitute a glue, but it has this kind of potential. But what I was even more trying to suggest with this kind of additional twist on Berlin's thesis is that perhaps we should also conceive this more generally, not simply as the disturbing things about the other, but more about the fact that the fact that we are dealing with others in all these situations is itself disturbing. That it's not so much, the focus is not so much on the fact that, okay, now this other person does this or that, which obviously can resonate with my whatever psychological history or in different ways, but more than there is a certain otherness which is there in whenever we have this kind of relations, which is not simply disturbing in the sense of, that we usually refer, okay, somebody does something disturbing, which is immediately recognized as such. Okay, what is this? And now then negotiate this. But in a more, here again, more structural ontological sense of a certain disturbance, something that I cannot fully control, it is not a direct extension of me, but also that the other does not simply but that there is this space or gap or whatever I called it, that is itself disturbing, that I cannot get this without this slight bug there. And so I would more focus on this than trying to propose some kind of on this discontinuity precisely of my own, if we want, satisfaction, then about this kind of this or that particularity, singularity of the other that I find disturbing or not. Perhaps this is already a slightly different level of the debate, although obviously related to this.
Do you think it has, I know it's come up in some circles, this distinction between control and letting from a Heideggerian point of view? In regards to, for example, that there's something I cannot fully control in regards to just otherness as such, or dealing with others in general. Like that, is there something here? I'm thinking about the move from desire to drive as potentially being a move similar to a move from control to letting in the Heideggerian point of view. Does that make sense to you, or is there a connection there?
Yeah, I think that, okay, yeah, Heideggerian notion of this is perhaps has some other facets and philosophical subtleties that I'm not necessarily aiming at here. But the position, this is also why I kind of use this term extension in the sense, so that control it. Okay, there is, I think, in all these sexual encounters, when there is some kind of potential or whatever, there is an element of surprise. And even if we think, and which is not perhaps exactly the same question as being in control or not, but one is perhaps the elimination of all dimension of a surprise that can be alienated with, or whatever, with aligned with this notion of control. But control is again a kind of very, very massive and large notion. But yeah, letting, if you want to put it like this, letting something happen, yes, but this, I think, somehow comes after the fact. What I mean is that I would not go for this romanticize this letting in a kind of attitude. Now I let myself being to be. It's not an attitude. It is actually, it happens. Shit happens, or whatever happens, and then there is a moment when you allow it or not, and I'm not saying that you always need to let it. Sometimes it's better to not, but in a way, I guess this is not a question of some kind of pre-attitude that can then assure you this or that. This would precisely not be about letting it happen. It is because things, unpredictable things happen here, and happen very often. And I'm not saying simply about some big surprises, but there are things which are simply, and then letting this, or at least allow for some time and space for this odd thing that appeared to kind of play it in, keep it in on the table, so to say, before rejecting it or transforming it into something else. This could be a way of this kind of not allowing something that it's not directly, you or me, be perhaps a point of a certain something that through which you can relate to the other. So I'm not sure if this is this answers a little bit, I hope, your question.
Well, perhaps I'm most appreciative of your emphasis that that we shouldn't just romanticize a letting attitude, basically. And in any case, that's
I think the moment this becomes an attitude, it is a kind of I would say pretentious I see this as a kind of pretentious seducer attitude, just, and also this kind of almost ideology of, yeah, if you don't try. I mean, this is, I think there is a true question of letting something be there or not, which only comes after the end, which you cannot simply produce or decide in advance with this kind of romanticized attitude of just letting things. And we have very different also psychological structures. Some are very opposed for all the surprises that are possible, but nevertheless there are moments that sometimes shift this, or at least almost force, necessitate, exaggerate a certain pause, a certain way of giving time and space to something that happened.
All right. I just want to sort of re-emphasize to me what I take to be maybe the thesis of the presentation, which is, the lovely title, The Inconvenience of Other People, but also the connection to that, the odd, disturbing things that matter the most. I mean, I'm just thinking and running through my head of many different things, whether it was, just in the context of living with other people, the conflict between my mom and my granddad coming down to something very similar, like the way he smokes cigarettes, or trying to do I was trying to do a project with my partner, visiting other people, and what disturbs her the most is the way they talk about their career, or the way they introduce themselves, or the way they don't introduce themselves, or visiting someone's house and disturbing someone because of the way you make your coffee, or the way you take a shower, or the way you hang up the towels. These seemingly very small things, these seemingly odd things, which create huge conflicts and create huge rifts, which these things could maybe be the sources of enjoyment, like not, starting to enjoy the way someone, decides to make their coffee or not make their coffee, or smokes their cigarette or not, or anyway, I could go on with simple examples like this.
No, it is also because this is kind of there is this. I just only very briefly introduced this notion through Berlant. Of course, there is a whole chapter of Lacanian theory that is precisely based on this interrogation of how enjoyment of others as such is always disturbing in a way, and these points also where most of racism and so on flourish is precisely, it's this kind of points. I know that I don't know, the neighbors are from India and they use certain kind of whatever spicy food, and just the smell of their kitchen can annoy me, which I can it's nothing, but this can produce huge outbursts of racist or the whatever. There are this kind of, this is why I said before that when it comes to enjoyment, there is this thing that actually to enjoy is always to trespass, even if you even if you put smokers in this kind of cubicles that they do at the airport, but still you can see them there is something offending in this. So the whole question of how enjoyment, precisely because of this extremate position, I'm sorry, but my cat, she will stop. She just brought me a small ball and she wants me to play with her. Sorry, I'm sorry for this disturbance.
That's okay. I mean,
if you hear this sound, it's just cat meow, nothing more disturbing.
Okay. I mean, I did have some like mega theoretical questions inspired from his sex passé. I might like I might be tempted to at least ask one of them, and then before bringing it on to more of an open Q&A. I mean, I had many, but I'm gonna try and isolate and zero in on one. So for those of you who haven't read his sex passé yet, it's available in our private portal. But the thing that I've been thinking about a lot since working with your recent article is one, sort of the emphasis that you have coming from a philosophical perspective to psychoanalysis, and really seeming to me to focus on the political consequences. I appreciated the way you articulated the relationship between, or at least my interpretation of the relationship between what you call sexo-leftism from like I interpreted that to be like the 1960s countercultural revolution type of move, and identity politics as a kind of hyper-regulatory entity. So you have these two opposites, the sexo-leftism being a type of it's sort of like a anti-regulation, and then the identity politics being a hyper-regulation, but both of them sharing sort of let's say an unthought presupposition of some type of sex positivity. On the one hand, the sexo-leftism may be trying to directly affirm sort of a Reichian orgasmic sort of mode of being, whereas the sort of identity politics hyper-regulatory mode, I think the way you framed it is that it's a type of emancipation through meaning of gender signification itself. And I want to sort of to bring this question ultimately to paying attention to the contemporary discourse between what you framed as this weird historical circle between cultural repression and its sort of libidinal anti-cultural excess. I thought that that was really well done. And I wondered, how does a political psychoanalysis point outside of the coordinates of what I see as, on the one hand, you could have, let's say, the woke liberal new religion with its anti-cultural libidinal excess of some form of masculinity. And then you could also have, for example, a reaction to that within sort of the reemergence of Christianity, where I think this circle that you're pointing towards is basically the way I see it articulated within Christian circles, is like Christ stands for culture and the Antichrist stands for the libidinal anti-culture. I just wonder if you think that a political psychoanalysis or a psychoanalysis that engages in political analysis could, point outside or in a different way beyond these coordinates of thinking about, the circle of cultural regulation and its excess.
Yeah. No, I think no. First, thank you for this summing up of this, which is in fact the kind of core of this paper, because I really found it interesting that there is this kind of that again, as it has been in the 60s, sexuality is very much in the front lines, let's say, or in the focus of all this kind of social, political, and so-called debates, but in a very different form. So if in the 60s, in fact, you had this kind of transgressive, let's liberate sexuality of all symbolic norms and names and whatever, in this sense, now this deregulated, now the movement is the opposite, the movement of liberation, and even for those who oppose, let's say, so-called binary logic and so-called, it's not simply, I mean, few perhaps would say just don't use any names, but usually the idea, the tendency is that you choose your designation, that there needs to be a symbolic articulation of what it is that your sexual singularity is about. So the move definitely is in the direction of symbolization, of finding the name, of naming whatever this multiplicity of genders or something else could be. So I found this quite interesting as a phenomenon in itself, but the crucial point was that, and this is in part an answer, could be an answer to your question about the political implications or whatever usages of psychoanalysis, is precisely that this opposition between libidinal anti-culture and cultural regulation is wrong, because it misses the point where libidinal anti-culture is hyper-produced precisely out of cultural regulation. So this was the because there is this
Perfect.
simple idea which says, okay, sex or libido is some raw primal substance, and there comes culture and symbolic and so on, and which kind of tries to tame it and puts on it its own regulations, and then there is suppression, the libido suffers, and there is this line of thought in Freud as well, but he really insisted also on this other side, that the more, and I think we can see this clearly precisely at this precise moment of our civilization, that the more of this, the more the culture advances, the more there are, so this is sophisticated, the more there is also the more we produce of this libidinal anti-culture. And this would be my thesis, and I think this is also follows from psychoanalysis. It's not simply because this libido tries to rebel forcefully against all this regulation. No, but because all this surplus excessive enjoyment is also produced as the other side of it. So that, and this, I guess, was the crucial Freudian insight, that symbolic regulation produces its own enjoyment, its own anti-culture. I mean, culture produces, and this is precisely this vicious, whatever, pessimist idea that some people kind of reproach to Freud, this pessimism. But it's not simply that, okay, what should we do? We cannot live with aggression. We should regulate, but then the aggression comes back. No, aggression does not simply return because we regulate it, but as attached to the regulation itself to some extent. And what really drives this spiral into what is now sometimes becoming extremely explosive is, in my view, not simply repression of the libido or whatever, but the repression of repression in the Freudian sense. That is to say, precisely the repression of this negativity on which both the symbolic and the libidinal, which are connected at this point precisely of this negativity, are based. So the moment we eliminate this also conceptually, and here we come to what you mentioned yourself, that both these perspectives are predicated upon a certain view of libido, and also the symbolic being something simply positive, what you can then do in this sense. And what is sorry.
So very quickly is that what I've been trying to think through is, if we change the presupposition of sex positivity to go deeper into what I take to be one of your central theses of the ontological negativity at the core of sex, is that brings us to, on the Christian side, I think, some sort of view of original sin, and on the psychoanalytic side, some sort of notion of symbolic castration, which I have found some textual support in Lacan for this idea. He says original sin is just a myth, whereas symbolic castration is sort of the structural real for the speaking being. But does it make sense to sort of seek some sort of political approach to the relationship between culture and libido that highlights or takes seriously sort of the ontological structure of let's say, castration?
Yeah, I mean, of course, but this is not as a kind of a direct political manifesto, let's say. I mean, this is precisely, I think this is what any good politics kind of necessarily takes into account or presupposes, not in the sense of castration simply or sending people to analysis to realize this, but precisely to see, to conceive, to understand also the social in this kind of double bind, which is precisely not simply, okay, to put it very simply, and this is from, I think I quote this at the end of this Sex Passé, when Lacan puts it that, okay, repression, that it is not simply that the social represses the drives, but that the social, let's say, whatever, the ideological apparatuses, are the family, whatever, school and so on. These are itself formations based on, constructed around a repression. It's not simply that they exercise the repression of, they tackle with their own repression. So there is not this negative core. It's not simply only there in the libidinal, it is also there in the symbolic. And this is what connects them, actually. It is through this double negativity. I mean, that this is the same kind of negativity. So it's not simply that one is positive and the other is negative, or that. So in this sense, and also, that then there are also, okay, we talk about negativity, but there is also this other idea very strongly present in Lacan, which I think has its political implications, not directly, but precisely in terms of what exactly is that the law does, or that the prohibition does. And it is not simply that it prevents you from enjoying, also, but that very often, the law is a way of giving a certain form, or let's say prohibition is a way of giving a certain form to some impasse, to some impossibility, to something, let's say, something that rises the powerlessness to symbolic impossibility. Because this is also about, I mean, as physical beings, we are rather pathetic. I mean, in many ways. I mean, not in any, but there are all these limitations which are real. It's not simply, okay, if we just would be left to ourselves, we would. There are real physical limitations, and some of these limitations are very frustrating. They are simply, we are powerless or impotent in this general way, not like sexually. But then precisely the symbolic kind of very often, I'm not saying that this is the case with all prohibitions, but it kind of precisely makes this frustration into some kind of symbolic impossibility, negativity that one can kind of handle, not simply be. And this is again something that is, I think, important in all kinds of social policy as well. It is not simply that one shouldn't have any kind, but precisely to make out of this frustration something that people can actually also relate to and not simply be overwhelmed with, and that cannot be so easily perhaps exploited in all these kinds of cheap populisms that we also see. But okay, I'm not saying that there is a direct, let's say, political program that follows from psychoanalysis. I don't see it in this way.
I guess before I open it up to Q&A, I'm going to open it up to Q&A now. I just want to make the comment, and just based on what you were saying there, to make out of the frustration something that people can relate to and not be overwhelmed. What I see is that the only thing that's fitting that category, I think, for a lot of people, is this return of religious identification. Is that religious identification is something that people can relate to in order to not feel overwhelmed. And I'm just wondering if, it is, and that's sort of also in the context. I know Slavoj is going to be releasing a book on Christian atheism, this year, and this is just coming up so strong in the culture. So anyway, I wanted to ask that, but Dimitri, I want to bring you in as well, and then for anyone else, just raise your hand if you have a question for Alenka, and we'll try to get to it within the next 30 minutes. Dimitri, why don't you jump in? This video was a condensed clip from Thought Lab, one of the 4 Philosophy Portal live event spaces. To watch the whole video, or to attend and participate in future events, visit philosophyportal.online and become a member today.